Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the fourth in our Back to Business series. This one is Revive, Positioning Your Brand for a Changed World. So it's been a really exciting webinar series that we've had for our Back to Business webinar series. We talked about Realign, which really covered the internal things that you need to do to get yourself ready to go into recovery from the pandemic. And then we talked about what to do if your company was just surviving, if your brand was in survival mode, some ways that you could just look at that and make some steps forward to survive. And then Thrive, we looked at ways to go from surviving into thriving, what those businesses that are currently thriving are doing, and ways to look at your brand. So now we are finally at the end. We are going to talk about Revive. So this is all about how to position your brand for a changed world. So as we're beginning to look towards the end of how we'll all come out of this, and it's going to be a completely different world. It's going to be completely changed. We know there's not going to be any going back to the old normal. And so is your brand ready for this new world? So we're going to talk about that today. So a little bit about me. I have over 20 years of experience. I am the Director of Brand Insights here at Able&Co, and we are a marketing and communications firm here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm also the local president and state governor of the American Advertising Federation. Let's talk a little bit about how the pandemic has changed the way that the audience looks at your brand. One of the first ways that audiences are looking at brands now differently is, does this particular brand meet the needs that I have? In other words, that could be, does it offer curbside delivery or online ordering? Has it made everything safe? Am I going to go into a place and know that I'm going to be safe? Is it meeting the needs of somebody who maybe has changed their budget level? So they're all looking at brands for, are they meeting my needs currently in this pandemic situation? Another thing to consider is the fact that there is now more choice. Customers are looking at brands in a whole new way now and trying brands that they have never tried before. So because their schedule and their life was interrupted, and because in some instances there was scarcity of certain products or scarcity of certain services or certain things closed down, people began to look at other options. Maybe they looked at a new brand. One of the reports that I read was really fascinating. It talked about how many more people are trying store label brands now and how that transition happened because the store label brands were the ones left on the shelves. People tried them, they realized they liked them, and now many people are making transition to those private label brands. So you're seeing this idea of choice, that you have plenty of choice out in the world. And then finally, the other way people are looking at your brand right now in a new way is your ethics. It has become more important than ever that you are doing things in an ethical and empathic way. So are you showing empathy for the people who are displaced or who are having struggles because of COVID? Are you showing good ethical treatment of your employees? Are you contributing back to the community? Are you practicing the safe social norms that we're all expected to fall in line with? Are you doing these things? If you're this good corporate citizen, we've seen in the Edelman report that people are looking at those brands and trusting them much more, that they are actually doing the right thing. So it's a whole new way of looking at brands that's been shifted from some of the tried and true to the brands that they love. But there are these three things that they're looking at. So you have to meet their needs. You have to make sure that you're always a good choice, and then you have to be really making sure you're following those codes of ethics. So what does that mean? Here's some reasons. Right now, people will say, why in the world would you choose this time to rebrand? It would also be the same kind of question, why would you start a business during this time? If you remember way back in 2009, when we had that economic downturn and had the recession, so many new businesses started and so many businesses rebranded in response to that economic crisis. So there were many new businesses started as people would lose their jobs. They're like, breeds entrepreneurship. People just want to go out and start their own thing. And so this is a chance that you're going to start to see many new brands and many shifted brands coming out of this. So why would you want to consider rebranding? Well, there are some reasons that we all consider rebranding at any point in time, and it's usually triggered by some of these changes. Some are good and some are bad. Some are reasons maybe not to consider rebranding, but that a lot of people do. So first is audience. Has your audience shifted? Has it changed in any way, shape, or form? Has their expectations changed? If you've watched any webinars with me, you know that I really like the concept of the unique buying tribe. So that means that instead of necessarily surrounding your brand around your own ideals and your own vision, it is about understanding a particular audience, getting to know them very well, and understanding how you are specifically positioned to meet their needs. That way, as that audience and that demographic shifts, you decide whether you're going to stay with that unique buying tribe and continue to evolve and morph to meet their needs, or if you're going to change over. Another good reason for changing your brand is your vision and mission. Has that changed? Have you changed the way that you're looking at your business? This may be either in response to COVID or it might not be. It is just this idea that something new is happening and something new is changing and we're going to try something different. That's always a great reason to consider a rebrand. You may be adding services. So as you are extending your line, it could be products or services that you're adding onto your line and into your brand, that may require you to, rather than do a brand extension, to do a brand refresh or to really look at how to change your brand up. Another reason to consider rebranding are changes in the marketplace. So this may be local changes, or it may be the industry that you're working in. It may be a particular group or set of people that you work within, an industry that maybe you serve. Any type of these things identify in the market as things that might change. And when the market changes, we have to change right along with it and evolve. And so that is a reason that many people have to change their brand, because just the market dried up or it went away or it changed significantly and they needed to move along with that. You may have a change in leadership or ownership. Your company may have purchased a new company or acquired a new company, or perhaps your company was merged with another one. And so you're going through this process of trying to figure out how this new leadership or how this new ownership or how this new merged organization is going to work and brand itself to the world. So that is a great reason to consider rebranding. And we work with a lot of companies that are going through that. And it's a great time to tell your story, to clarify that vision, and to really put a great brand out there. Another time that it's debatable about whether this is a good choice to go through rebranding, but a lot of people do, is when they experience a crisis and they feel like they need to start over, they need to rebrand. Now, common wisdom and common public relations wisdom says you're not going to escape it just by changing the curtains, but sometimes if that leads into new ownership, new management, a different way of doing things, then the rebrand becomes appropriate. So don't do a rebrand as just a way to try and escape some hot water. But if it actually initiates changes in your organization of one of these other 5, then it's a perfect catalyst to get you going. So those are some reasons to consider rebranding. Let's talk a little bit about what you're going to do. I wanted to start this off by just giving you a very high-level look at how we approach a brand restart. And the idea is that you ask the question, do I want to rebrand? And you have to look at all of these things that we are discussing and say, yes, I feel like it's one of these reasons and I haven't had a perfect reason to go rebrand. So you just decide and make that question about whether or not you need to. So when we're working with our clients, we go through the whole process of saying, why are you rebranding? What is it going to achieve for your company? What is it going to achieve for your bottom line? What is it going to achieve for that brand's equity to go through this process? The next thing that we do is we think about it in one of 3 ways. You're either doing a brand revision, which is a very small shift. It's adding something on, or it's just making a slight tweak to your brand voice or your brand message. It may be adding that extra service. It may be just kind of broadening yourself just a little bit. It's the type of change that only your core audience are going to kind of take notice of immediately. Other people will be brought into that. So it's just a shift. The next is what I like to call a brand refresh. This is when you're keeping your core, you're keeping the very basic things that make your brand tick, your mission, your vision, that positioning, your general direction, and maybe you're just doing a refresh. This could be changing a color palette, tweaking a logo, a new tagline, those types of things, but you're not really changing the core. This might be just trying to make your brand feel a little bit more new, a little bit more modern, a little bit more crisp. And finally, the third way that we look at a rebrand is if we want to do what I call a redo. So we've got revise, refresh, and redo. And redo means coming from the ground up. Nothing is off the table. New logo, new name, new positioning, new mission, new vision. All of those things, when you have a purpose for changing and a new direction, then a brand redo is kind of that approach that we like to take, where we look at everything and decide what needs to go and what needs to stay. So after you've gone through this process, then there's a point in time when you're going to want to review that. And you're going to want to say, are we putting everything right in the world? Because sometimes the rebranding process can take a few months, can take a bit of time. Consider people who may have started a rebranding in January and how much has changed since then. So you want to review and make sure you're still on target, that you're still actually talking to that market correctly. So do that review, make sure that you're in there. And then finally, the reveal. And the way you reveal it is just as important as anything, because you want to tell the correct story of why you rebranded and what your approach is and why people should be looking at your brand in a different way. If not, it could come across very saccharine and self-serving. So we want to make sure that when we do the reveal, that we're doing it in a very appropriate, very sensitive way to the current business climate right now. So these are some things to consider as we start to talk about the different approaches that we might have. There are two scenarios for rebranding. And I would ask, if you're thinking about a rebrand, which rebrand describes you, which situation? So the first are those who are rebranding despite the pandemic. So this would be a brand project that was started before the pandemic and then paused. It was put on hold, or you're looking at it and saying, I don't know if we should go through with this. We've got all of this going, but now just doesn't seem like the time to rebrand. And this is the question. Is it a good time to rebrand? Is it a good time to pull the trigger on that rebrand you've been considering? And here are some of the things to be thinking about. Is this the right timing? That's one of the things you're wanting to ask yourself. You want to make sure that you're hitting the perfect timing for that. And is this going to make the right impression? Are people going to think that we're doing this to take advantage of the situation? Or are they going to understand that we are evolving? And do you currently, in this economy, have the resources to dedicate to that process? That may be people, that may be the correct funds. I know a lot of people's marketing budgets have shifted so tremendously this year. So this is a great time to think about maybe doing that. The other group of people, the other situation, are those who are rebranding, and I'll just say because of the pandemic. So this may be a branding project that started before the pandemic or during the pandemic. And the ones that I'm talking about are the ones where they had to change their focus and be very responsive to the situation that's going on now. They may have had to rebrand or shift their brand as a means of survival. The old brand just was not cutting it, was not speaking to their audience. Something had changed in the marketplace or changed in the way their audience used their brand, that they needed to make a very drastic change. This may be, an event company that suddenly had to figure out how to do online events as opposed to using their facility. This may be those restaurants that suddenly had to adapt to curbside service. Those are the easy ones to think about, but the change in their brand, the change in their method was driven by survival. One of those two scenarios would be the reason that you would be rebranding right now. So let's talk a little bit about rebranding despite the pandemic. One of the things to do is continuing or accelerating a planned rebrand, and that can have several advantages. For instance, right now, more customers are willing to accept change. They see change happening every day. There is just a whole shift in our whole mindset of the way we're consuming brand. And so customers are right now in a position and in a mindset where that shift is not going to seem strange or dysfunctional or odd to them. Instead, they're very willing to accept that change. It is another chance right now in a very chaotic market to differentiate yourself. It kind of helps you to bubble back up to the surface when there is a significant brand change or one that's appropriate and makes sense. Especially, again, like I said, it's about that reveal. It's about telling that great story about your brand and why you're evolving. Right now, audience needs are much more focused. Everyone is really looking in and honing in on what they need. A little bit of superfluous spending has kind of gone away. It's beginning to come back, but they are very focused in. And so your audience that needs what you offer is going to be hyper-focused and looking on that. Also, another thing to think about is how the competitive landscape is changing. You have competitors who have come into the space that maybe were not there before. You have competitors that have left the space that were there before. And so you have a completely different competitive landscape. And so this is a great time to go in and make your mark rather than reacting at the very end when the chips have all fallen and some new person has come in and taken a significant part of the market share. And then another thing about rebranding right now and considering to accelerate that is it demonstrates confidence and strength. When you are going out there and putting your brand on the pedestal, in the spotlight, and saying, we care about our clients, we care about our position, we care about how we're evolving to meet this need, it positions you as being very confident, very strong, and evolving at the right time, as opposed to being the shrinking violet that's just kind of hanging in the background. These are some reasons to think about. The important thing is to consider creating the right approach. One thing you definitely would have to have if you are rebranding at this time is a certain amount of flexibility in your schedule. You don't want to you want to be listening right now to the market. You want to be listening to your audience. You want to be listening to make sure that when you push that green light and when you say go, that everything is just exactly as you have prepared for it, that there's no big whammies. So be making sure that you're listening as you get ready to launch that brand. Mistakes will still happen. There will still be, you launch and then the next day something crazy happens, but just making sure that you're being flexible. As I said, listening is very important. Again, positioning it as you are evolving to meet needs. That is crucial, that you're not just changing to take advantage of the situation, but that your brand is evolving to meet the needs of your audience and the world at large, actually, as people are looking at the ethics of the situation. So for your community. It could be a PR story about getting back on track. We all were kind of run overboard by this pandemic, and this is a way to get back on track and to say, we have a plan for the future. We've thought about this, we've absorbed this, and we are ready to move forward. And everyone could use a dose of that positivity and that forward-looking strength as opposed to just kind of hanging back. And then last, make it personal. Make this a connection to your audience in a very personal way. Feature your audience. Show their interaction with your brand. And this is why you're doing it. So make it very personal to your audience of why you're evolving your brand. So a couple of examples that I want to talk about that have been in, the advertising news. The first one is the American Lung Association. So the American Lung Association has been around for 100 years. They had already started doing the rebrand. They had already thought about moving from red, which is a panic color. It's, feels angry. It's very medical, but it really was not giving them the positive feeling that they wanted. They also, the symbol didn't really have a story attached to it. It actually is a symbol from the Crusades. The symbol was created about their crusade against tuberculosis, and the crusade idea doesn't really play in as much now. So they decided to rework their logo and retell a story that is based on education, that is based on community, that is based on this whole idea of a vision without lung disease. And so they rethought through their symbol, its meaning, how they're going to tell that story. And you see that here. They also moved to the blue color, upper and lowercase font. They made some changes to their brand visually. But then when you also go to their website, they began to speak directly to COVID patients and to the COVID scenario. The decision that their CMO made, she said, they thought about pausing, they thought about waiting until it blew over, and then they said, well, do we want to meet the people who are going to be suffering with a respiratory disease and the respiratory community with our old brand or with the brand we're going to be carrying for the next 100 years? So they actually accelerated to meet that need so that they could meet them with their new brand in place. Another great story about rebranding despite the pandemic is King Arthur Flour. So over here on the far right, you see the old packaging, if you've ever seen it. This is actually the nation's oldest flour company, and they decided it was time for a rebrand. Now, this rebrand is super exciting because it wasn't, even though it seems like it was planned perfectly around the pandemic, they wanted to broaden from being all about flour, which is a commodity, which is a thing, to being about the community of bakers. So they changed their name from King Arthur Flour to King Arthur Baking Company, and they became the home for all things baking and opening up to the baking community. You see not only their beautiful new design that's modern and has wheat and has a crown and it's very referential, but looks really cool and modern and hip. But also, I pulled some of these samples from their social media because it's so indicative of what they're trying to do. I love this one that says, cooking and baking is both physical and mental therapy. Or baking is like washing, the results are equally temporary. You know, it's just this whole fun idea. This idea, as you see at the bottom, we are bakers, and devoting themselves to that unique buying tribe. This is a perfect example of a brand shifting to meet what their audience wants. Their audience doesn't just want flour, their audience wants cooking advice. They want all kinds of flour. They may want eventually different types of pans and different types of instructions and all sorts of ideas. And they have now created a community around baking. Now, this rolled out just as COVID was beginning. And what happened when we all had to stay at home? Everybody started baking. And so they got a lot of attention. It felt like they were perfectly timed. Their YouTube channel blew up because they started to do some videos about baking at home and what you can do as a home baker to make it real, you know, to get those professional level results. And then they also had a baking series that was with their professional baker that's showing, you know, showcasing how to use the different materials and the different flours. So it's really been exciting for them. And in the month of March, they had a 2,000%, yes, I said 2,000, not 200, 2,000% increase. And they then had to shift their whole business model to keep up with that, to keep that supply chain going, because they shifted to change their brand to meet their audience needs. And then they were flexible with their schedule and they kept meeting their audience needs. So two really great examples of rebranding despite the pandemic. You may be in a situation where you need to rebrand because of the pandemic. That seems like it's really strong, like the pandemic happened and you suddenly decide to change your brand. And in some cases that may be what happens, but in many, it's the idea of shifting your brand as you're going through a rebrand to keep up with the times. So now is the time to check and see if your brand is still relevant. Have you added a new service or changed your purpose? That's one of the first things to look at and say, is my brand still meeting the needs? Have your audience needs changed? Due to the pandemic, has the need of your audience changed? Has your competition shifted? These are the same questions we were asking before. Reasons to do a rebrand. Has the competition changed? Has the market changed? It certainly has. So you need to look at how your industry has changed and check and see if your brand is still meeting these needs. And then does your brand fit the new normal? Is it out of date? Does it feel out of touch? Does it feel like when people look at it like, this is something we're not going to do anymore, or this is not the way we would approach this? And so if you're starting to feel very static and not really in time, then now is the time to consider changing up your brand. Some of the reasons to consider accelerating your rebrand at this time are that change right now can feel like an organic part of your ongoing brand. It can feel like the natural evolution, like you're just taking the next step. So if it feels like you're being very responsive to the situation, if it feels like you are saying, you know what, this has affected us too, and we are evolving, and this is an organic way that we're going to evolve, this is one of the benefits of considering accelerating this and not waiting till it all, quote unquote, dies down. If you're thinking about waiting until it all dies down, you're probably going to have that me too at the end and be lost in a lot of revitalization that's going to happen. Your customers have changed, and so they expect the brands that they use to change as well. So they're very likely to understand and embrace this brand evolution. Another great benefit is that you get the chance to be ahead of the curve. You get a chance to beat your competitors to the punch. If there are things that you're already seeing that are changing in your industry or changing in your services, this gives you a chance to evolve your brand, to wrap around those, and to be the first to market with the new branding, with the new idea. A lot of companies are going to have to change after things settle down. And if you are already planning for that and already working through that process, you're going to be a step ahead. And then the pandemic might give you a chance to do a brand extension. You may not have to shift everything. You may just be able to add on. So perhaps if you are Restaurant A, now you have this new extension called Restaurant to Go or something like that, your brand name to go. Or perhaps you're doing the at-home version of your brand. We have one really good example of a brand that shifted their branding to meet the needs. And that's Orange Theory. They added Orange Theory at home. For those of you who are saying, oh, well, this was just their little mark to do this service and stuff, they have already begun to talk about how this is going to be a future part of their brand. As a matter of fact, the CEO said, the pandemic only accelerated our evolving business model to be a hybrid in-studio and digital fitness brand. That's not just adding something temporarily. That's saying we are shifting our brand. That's a brand expansion that is going to be big for them, as opposed to others who have positioned those kinds of things as very temporary or we can't wait to get, they just kind of said, you know what? You can still do the Orange Theory idea, the concept of how they do their workouts, which is what their brand is really about. It's not about the equipment, it's about their concept of how they do workouts. You can do that at home, and this is how. And so you have the same, not the exact same experience, but you definitely have some of the same benefits in a different package. And so this is a brand extension and a brand shift that really works. They're able to just keep the same core message and the same core idea, but now offering it with the at-home workouts. Another rebrand that is happening right now, it just launched on September 15th, is the Citrix rebrand. So they were already in the midst of rebranding. They had started the process. You know, sometimes these can take months, especially for really large companies. So they had begun the process and then COVID hit. And so they have adjusted their messaging and their approach to meet up with the new normal. So again, another quote from their CMO. Work is no longer a place. It's happening in kitchens and basements, in parks and on sidewalks, and scaled back socially distanced offices. Employees need a workspace so they can think, create, and explore and work the way they want. So Citrix has embraced this idea of the space, the workspace. When you go to their website, it is all about creating this space and creating this vision of you. So Citrix has taken the bull by the horns and had an opportunity to really change it up, and they embrace the change that's happening in the world and made it part of their story. Those examples of how to rebrand either despite the pandemic or because of the pandemic and in response to the pandemic are two ways to look at whether or not you should be rebranding. Again, to look at our model here that we have, our kind of very high level model, is when you think about, do we really need to rebrand? So if this question has been going through your mind and saying, our brand just really doesn't feel like it's resonating right now. It feels like it's losing steam. It's not connecting with our audience. It's not differentiating us from the competition. It's not really speaking to what the market needs. And it's not really showing us to the world in the best light. Then you might want to be considering this. And so you can either revise your brand, that is make those small tweaks, maybe that brand extension. You saw how Orange Theory just kind of revised and just kind of moved forward. You could do a refresh like you saw the American Lung Association do. They did a little bit of a refresh. They retold the story, but they still have the same fight against lung disease. It's the same core mission, the same core services, but they've just told their story in a whole fresh way. Or you may need to do a redo. When you look at what Citrix has done, they went through the new logo, they went through everything. Theirs might be a little bit halfway between a refresh and a redo. And then you're going to want to review and say, are we ready to do this? Is this relevant at this time? Once you have that idea of how you're going to change and what you're going to do, you need to ask yourself, is it relevant? And then the way you reveal it is extremely important in this day and age. You want to make sure that you are not tone deaf, that you're setting the exact right tone. So how do you get started in that? Well, now is definitely the time to be thinking about this. If you're doing a revise, you could do minor changes right now and brand extensions, and those could be made in the fourth quarter. And probably go ahead and start launching things. You see things like the way Orange Theory did, they launched that very quickly. Those types of extensions and little revisions to your brand, those should be able to happen pretty quickly. A brand refresh, right now, changing certain aspects of your brand, you could start working on that and be ready for a January launch right on day one, ready to go with a whole new look. If you're wanting to do a redo, then you probably want to start planning now for that 2021 launch strategy. You really want to look at how you are going to launch that brand and what that's going to look like, and plan for that to take up a good portion of the first half of that year. So what you want to do is start with a brand review workshop. We love to do these. Talk about what your brand is it relevant now, what types of changes you should consider making. We can guide you through that whole process so that you understand what the next few months could look like for your brand, and will help you determine the health of that brand and where it could go and what the possibilities are, as well as a plan for how to reveal that brand to the public in the best possible way. If you have any questions, then feel free to contact me. My address is hugh@theableagency.com. I would love to have a discussion with you about your brand. I would love to discuss what the possibilities are and look forward to hearing from you. So I hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us again.